Left-handed and hand-switching children score higher on parent-reported hyperactivity and inattention scales than children who write with their right hand. Across a study of nearly 8,000 kids, tracked from age 3 to age 14. That finding comes from researchers at University College London, published in the journal Laterality, using data from the UK's Millennium Cohort Study, one of the largest childhood tracking studies in the world. It landed in wider coverage this week, and it taps into an old idea that keeps resurfacing every few years. That left-handed people are wired differently, and that difference shows up in more than which hand holds the pen. This time there is a real dataset behind the headline. Not just anecdote, but there is also a specific detail buried in the numbers that most of the coverage skipped. One that changes what this finding actually means. So for the next few minutes, here is what the study found. Why handedness might connect to attention at all. What the coverage left out. And whether any of this should change how you think about a left-handed kid. Or yourself. The researchers, Maria Sifaki and Erini Flori, pulled data from 7,951 children in the Millennium Cohort Study, a UK research project that has followed the same children from birth into adulthood. Parents reported which hand their child wrote with, then completed a standard measure called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire at 5 points in that child's life. Age 3, 5, 7, 11, and 14. That questionnaire scores several categories, including hyperactivity and inattention, along with emotional symptoms, conduct problems, and peer difficulties. Roughly 9 in 10 children in most populations write with their right hand. Close to 1 in 10 write with their left. And a much smaller group switches between hands depending on the task. Known as mixed-handedness, when the researchers compared right-handed children against everyone else combined, non-right-handed children scored higher on hyperactivity and inattention, on average, at multiple points across that 11-year span. The pattern held up across a large, general population sample, not a small clinical group of children already diagnosed with anything. That is what made it newsworthy. A big, nationally representative dataset appearing to back up a folk idea that usually only shows up in small studies. Why would which hand you write with have anything to do with attention? The theory researchers point to is called brain-lateralization. Your brain divides labor between its left and right hemispheres. Language tends to concentrate on one side, spatial processing on the other. And handedness is one of the most visible signs of how that division shakes out. Most right-handed people have a clearly dominant hemisphere for language and motor control. People who are left-handed or mixed-handed more often show a less clearly divided brain, where the two hemispheres share tasks more evenly instead of one side taking clear charge. Some researchers think that same less organized division of labor might extend to attention and impulse control, systems that also rely on coordinated signaling between hemispheres. Under that theory, unusual handedness is not a cause of attention difficulties. It is a visible marker of the same underlying brain wiring that also shapes attention. This is not a new idea. Smaller studies going back decades have floated a handedness ADHD link, with mixed and often contradictory results. What is different about the new UCL study is the sample size, and the fact that it tracked the same children over more than a decade instead of taking one snapshot. Here is the detail buried past most of the headlines. When the researchers split the non-right-handed group apart, the story changed. Left-handed children on their own were not reliably different from right-handed children once mixed-handed children were removed from the comparison. The elevated hyperactivity and inattention scores were being driven almost entirely by the much smaller group of mixed-handed children. Kids who switch hands rather than consistently favor one. That is a meaningfully different finding than left-handed people are more likely to have ADHD, which is the version that spread across social media and aggregator sites this week. Mixed-handedness affects roughly one child in 100, a fraction of the 10% or so who write with their left hand consistently. The researchers also found the pattern showed up mainly in boys. Girls in the sample showed no significant association between handedness and hyperactivity or inattention at all, so the actual finding is narrow. A small subgroup of boys who switch hands showed a statistical association with attention symptoms. That is a real, specific, testable result. It is also a much smaller and stranger claim than the headline most people actually read. Now the part the coverage mostly left out. The study's own authors describe every effect they found as very small. This was not a clinical diagnosis of ADHD. It was a parent-completed questionnaire, which captures perceived behavior, not a structured medical assessment. The comparisons in the widely shared results were unadjusted, meaning the researchers had not yet accounted for other factors that can independently affect both handedness reporting and hyperactivity scores. Things like family stress, household income, or a parent's own attention difficulties, which can run in families alongside handedness. Millennium Cohort children were not randomly assigned a handedness. So this is an observational association, not a controlled experiment, and it cannot show that handedness causes attention differences or the reverse. The sample of mixed-handed children driving the boys' result was also much smaller than the overall sample, which makes that specific slice of the finding statistically noisier and harder to replicate. None of this means the study is wrong. It means the honest headline is closer to researchers found a small, narrow, unadjusted statistical pattern in one subgroup. Not left-handed people have different brains that cause attention problems, which is the version currently spreading. Quick recap. A study of nearly 8,000 UK children found that children who switch hands rather than consistently favor one, not left-handed children generally, showed higher parent-reported hyperactivity and inattention scores, and mainly among boys. The theory connecting handedness to attention is brain-lateralization. The idea that how your brain divides labor between hemispheres shows up in both which hand you use and how your attention systems are organized. So, signal or noise? Split verdict. The underlying science is signal. Brain lateralization is real, well studied, and a plausible link between handedness and neurodevelopment is worth continued research, especially with a dataset this large tracking real children over a decade. But the version of this story that turned into headlines, "Left-handed people are wired for ADHD," is noise. The actual result is narrower, smaller, unadjusted, and limited mostly to mixed-handed boys. Not a verdict on left-handed people as a group. And it says nothing reliable about any individual, including you or your kid, if you write with your left hand. This study is not about you specifically. Subscribe for the psychology headlines that get separated from what the actual data supports. Signal from the noise. Every week.